Hello and welcome to today's session on what I think you will agree is a very important subject for those of us responsible for protecting education data systems, and that is cybersecurity threat and incident response. My name is Mike Tassi, and I'm with the Privacy Technical Assistance Center, or PTAC, at the U.S. Department of Education, and I'm genuinely thrilled to be able to talk to you today about that important subject that affects us all, incident response. Now, before we get too far down the rabbit hole of incident response, let me spend a few minutes here with a shameless plug for PTAC and the Department of Education's resources that are available to you and all of our education family to help you address your student privacy issues or questions that you may have. PTAC is a technical assistance center under the U.S. Department of Education Student Privacy Policy Office, or SPPO. SPPO incidentally administers the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA. Hopefully you've heard of that one, along with several other federal student privacy laws. Our charter here at PTAC is to be a one-stop shop for all things student privacy and data security. For schools and districts, post-secondary institutions, local and state education agencies, teachers, administrators, students, parents, and of course, the general public, to help our education family enhance the privacy and security of education data systems, protect student data, and achieve compliance with applicable privacy laws and security best practices. To achieve this, we do a lot of sessions just like this one on a variety of subjects related to student privacy, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act and other federal privacy laws, data security and technology, as well as a variety of other types of training that has been requested by you, our education family. In addition to that, PTAC operates a privacy help desk, which is available to anyone through our website, either online or via phone or email, to provide assistance and feedback, as well as a long list of other service offerings such as document and agreement review, site visits, in-person or remote training sessions on a variety of subjects. And of course, we also have our great website itself at studentprivacy.ed.gov. That's student privacy, all one word, .ed.gov. If you haven't checked out our website, I definitely recommend that you do, because we have a massive online presence there with a ton of great resources. We have a library of resource documents, including best practice guides, frequently asked questions, and links to important information, partners and resources. So pretty much if you have a question related to student privacy, we've got something for you on our website that you may find helpful. In addition to that, we also host on-demand online training modules on FERPA that have been used 100,000 times plus a year by teachers and administrators to familiarize themselves with FERPA requirements and best practices. Increasingly, we're seeing students and parents also making use of these resources to learn about their rights under FERPA. And if something a little less formal is more your speed, we also have many short format YouTube videos on a variety of aspects of student privacy and data security, from protecting privacy information in email, to privacy and school volunteers, to ways in which you can enhance your district privacy and transparency while protecting privacy. All of these videos are short, easily digestible, and embeddable from the department's YouTube channel and accessible through our website. So as I mentioned, if you haven't been out there to check it out at studentprivacy.ed.gov, then you're definitely missing out. Of course, we love to hear from you on the phone. So if online isn't your thing, give us a ring on the phone or shoot us an email as well. We'd love to talk to you however you reach out. An important thing to know about PTAC, because sometimes there's some trepidation about reaching out to us about questions on student privacy, is that as a technical assistance center, we exist only to help you and answer your questions, provide information and resources. We're not the FERPA police. Our role is strictly to provide help, so you shouldn't feel hesitant to reach out and contact us if you have questions. We really are here to help. I'll make sure at the end of today's session that I leave our contact information up. So if you would like to reach out, we would love to hear from you. with feedback or any questions that you have. So with that, let's get into the reason why we're here today, and that is incident response planning. The unfortunate reality is that it's really not a case of if, but rather when your organization will experience a cyber incident or a data breach. Unfortunately, that's the reality. So let's talk a little bit about numbers and set the table for our discussion today. Last year, there were literally hundreds of data breaches affecting schools, and thousands of additional things that were categorized as cyber incidents that maybe did not rise to the same level as something where it was confirmed that data was breached. So in fact, education is now on par with some of these larger sort of bigger industries that we more commonly associate with cyber attacks. So there were dozens of breaches last year regarding schools that did in fact involve hundreds or sometimes thousands or tens of thousands of victims. We're not just talking about students here. We're also talking about parents and school employees as well. So the amount of data that is being breached from schools is truly at an all-time high, and we're talking about pretty sensitive data about a variety of folks, not only our students, but also employees and parents as well. Beyond that, some of these incidents cause school closures, sometimes extended periods of time where schools are frantically trying to restore these critical data systems that we've grown, especially in pandemic times, to rely on more and more. The net effect of this is that cyber attacks cost education billions and billions of dollars that we can't afford to lose. They harm our relationship with students and parents, and obviously the community, and they put our employees and students and parents' data at risk of sometimes terrible criminal effects like identity theft or tax fraud. So there's lots of reasons why data security in education is a critical topic to be discussing at this point in time. So while all these things are very scary, it's probably make you want to, if you're in the school IT business, start updating your resume and, and looking for a new line of work. Rest assured, there is a lot that we can do as an industry to glean data from what is available about cyber attacks in education and help us reverse this trend to make ourselves harder targets, reduce the risk, and protect our data. So what you see on the screen here is an excerpt from a data breach report that is put out by, in this case, I believe it's Verizon, that breaks down numbers by industry and talks about cyber incidents and data breaches. Now, it's important to know that when we talk about the difference between incident and breach here is kind of the context. Incidents here is a set of events that include all types of cyber attacks, and security events across the spectrum, regardless of whether there was data theft or data breach. So you kind of think of it like this, like not all incidents are data breaches, but all data breaches are incidents. So if that helps kind of clear up, there's always a larger number of incidents than there are data breaches. But so with that in mind, here's just, this is one report. I would suggest, organizations make use of all the data that's available, but for the purposes of kind of illustrating how this data can help shape, I'm just using this one today. Education here is the fourth column from the left on the screen, and as you can see, immediately some patterns start to jump out as we look at the numbers of incidents and their root causes. When we're talking about incidents in general, remember this is, again, inclusive of all types of incidents. And so there's definitely a couple of big hitters here. We can see that the number of incidents involving social engineering and system intrusion, hacking. But the elephant in the room here is clearly denial of service with 900 plus instances. So as we look across the industries here, we see that education is no longer one of the less impacted verticals, right? We can see that we've really sort of we've unfortunately cut that distance, and we're on par with some of these more commonly attacked verticals, things like retail and finance. So now we can rest assured that we are front and center in the eyes of cyber attackers. As an additional sort of ironic point, it also happens that there are 1,337 incidents impacting education in this particular report, which is simultaneously funny and depressing because that number represents something in internet slang called leet speak, translating to loosely to the word elite or exceptionally skilled, typically used in jest. Certainly, our industry are not elite by any stretch, as we are increasingly being successfully attacked. However, there are some things that we can do about that. We're gonna discuss that in this presentation today. So now let's look a little deeper at the numbers. We looked at incidents in the prior slide. In this particular slide, we're looking at just data breaches or incidents where attackers were successful in either gaining access to or stealing private data from schools. This is the same sort of layout on this slide, but now we see some different causes broken out on the left side there. And some different patterns start emerging. Here we can see that there are significant numbers of breaches attributed to causes like web application attacks and other types of hacking that are sort of the traditional cyber intrusions. And of course, self-inflicted wounds from errors and whoops moments, misconfigurations, etc. But one clearly stands out by a mile here, and that is social engineering. It's head and shoulders above the rest. Right? So now, social engineering in this context can mean a lot of things, from the usual suspects like various types of phishing emails you might receive, to more hands-on approaches like SMS smishing or voice vishing. I'm sure you're seeing a pattern on how they're putting these together now. But all of these approaches have similar bottom lines. And that is attackers manipulating, convincing, or tricking users into performing some action that benefits them. And that could be things like clicking a link or downloading a malicious attachment or providing their credentials into a fake website. So this is a major avenue of attack when it comes to vectors like ransomware, which is highly prevalent. Of course, you probably know this in the education community right now. Ransomware is everywhere. So here again, you see that education is on par with other industries. We're commonly associating as well, at least we're not those guys, right? So no, we have reached parity in many of these cases. But there's more that we can glean, right? The point of bringing these numbers up and showing you this is that we've now made it sort of to the big time. And as an industry, we're a staple food for the biggest predators on the internet. This means that we need to expect them to continue to look at education organizations as a primary target. As we just saw, however, in the previous two slides, there's a lot of information out there, and that information can be a valuable tool for you to help plan for and prevent these types of events from occurring. There's a whole host of these types of reports that come out every year. There are information sharing centers that put out these types of data, the ISACs, for example, and lots of other sources where you can get information that you can use to kind of help determine what the majority threats are to your organization and your data and take steps to prevent that. What can we glean from the previous two slides as we sort of went through that exercise of determining what the patterns were? Well, I think in short, it's when they come for us, and they're definitely going to come for us. They'll be coming for our users first. Attackers who successfully breach data at schools primarily use social engineering as the first line of attack based on what we saw. They're going to abuse users with phishing and all types of social engineering attacks. And a lot of times they're just going to play the numbers. And this makes sense. What I mean by that is that your organization probably has hundreds of employees, and really it only takes one of them having a bad day and clicking an errant link or downloading an attachment to give the attackers a foothold in the environment. So Harkening back to my days as a security tester, social engineering was so much of an almost guaranteed win that it was rarely allowed. So that kind of highlights the point that the users are going to be one of your first lines of attack. For any of you in attendance today whose organization is doing these sort of self-phishing assessments, where you send your own fake phishing emails to your staff as a training tool, you should always ask yourself, hey, when was the last time those assessments ever come back with a 0 as the nobody clicked it result, right? That's a rarity, right? It rarely happens. There's always 1 or 2 or perhaps more that click the mail, and attackers run the same math, right? So don't worry if it's not 0. Even among cybersecurity people, everyone has a bad day once in a while. The idea here is to build that awareness so that the length between bad days goes longer. Attackers, use these techniques because they work. So by the numbers, we can take away that if we're going to get attacked as a school, it's probably going to be involving our employees and staff in some way. It's probably going to involve ransomware, because that is sort of what's happening in the education space nowadays. Unfortunately, if there's a ransomware attack in this country, there's pretty decent odds that it's happening at a school. And if it isn't ransomware or something of that nature, it's probably going to be a denial of service attack or something similar, right? Which almost sounds tame by comparison, right? So at least with a denial of service attack, my data is safe. Well, sure, there is that, but it also happens that it could take you offline, right? It could keep your school from being able to conduct remote classes or connect back to testing or assessment systems or impact employees that are working. So, for example, what happens when the outage happens during testing week? Because students would never buy time on a botnet to get out of testing next week. So all joking aside, these trends can kind of help us leverage this information to prepare ourselves and our information systems for what is coming. All right, so if we were to sort of evaluate what we've learned in the previous couple of slides, right? And again, this is a small sample. I recommend you go make use of lots of these, but do the same similar sort of exercise. We need to spend some time and resources on training our staff, right? We have so much focus in the social engineering realm that it makes sense that certainly we would want to make some investments in training to prepare them for things like social engineering attacks and reduce your social engineering attack surface. We probably also need to think about things like DDoS mitigation and have conversations maybe with our service providers about combating denial of service attacks in ways that the school can increase its resilience to these sorts of attacks and maybe operate through them. And most importantly for this conversation, I think we need to make sure that we have plans and processes in place to deal with incidents when they happen and tailor those plans to the changing threat landscape, right? So as we are looking to spot these trends out there, we need to, one, understand that it's going to happen to us at some point. So we need to have plans and processes in place to deal and respond once that occurs, and they should be tailored to what we're most likely going to receive. So through proper planning and proactive implementation of best practices and sort of scouring these data that we were just talking about, we can potentially save ourselves a lot of heartbreak and billions of dollars as a collective industry. We can reduce the incidences of downtime associated with things like cyber attacks and ransomware. We can help maintain better compliance with applicable laws, both at the federal and increasingly at the state levels, and avoid those costly and confusing legal implementations or implications, rather, of a breach, and avoid all of the reputational harm and the loss of trust associated with a serious data breach. So one of the unappreciated perks, however, of having good cybersecurity practices and outstanding plans and processes for incident response is the overall risk reduction, right? these things are, they're not isolated. They don't exist in a vacuum. So you get sort of a broader effect of having good cybersecurity practices and having good incident response. Attackers are lazy by nature, right? They go after the lowest hanging fruit. Having a well thought out security program, including good incident response planning, these things can make you less inviting of a target, right? It's very much like that old adage, to avoid getting eaten by a lion, you don't have to be the fastest zebra, just not the slowest. That concept translates well into cybersecurity because of what we just talked about, right? Hackers are looking for the easy win, and every little thing you do within your organization to increase awareness of cyber threats, every tweak you make to your incident response capabilities, it makes you a faster zebra. It's easy to think, oh, that's such a small change, it won't make a difference in the big picture. But these small incremental improvements over time quickly take you out of that realm of low-hanging fruit and then make it much, much more likely that attackers will simply pass you by and go pick on somebody else who's an easier target. So now that we've set the table with some information about where we are as a sector and understand the prevalence of cyber attacks against schools, let's shift our focus a little bit to how we can position ourselves to be ready if, or should I say when, one of these events impacts our schools or our organizations. So the biggest bang for the buck for any organization when it comes to cyber incident preparedness is, of course, training. The days of hackers sort of solely just breaking through your technology, through your firewalls, and taking advantage of your software they're rapidly kind of coming to a close. There's lots of organizations are starting to build better software. We're understanding the threat that this technology poses, and we're implementing great mitigations to prevent that sort of thing. And so, of course, the attackers are changing tactics. So now today's threats are much more of a blend between some of these technology vulnerabilities, but also a lot of people vulnerabilities. Almost every successful cyber attack today has some form of social engineering component associated, such as phishing attacks that prey on your users and staff. Or in the case of schools, even your students, right? Because they're also computer users, resource users within your environment. So the same vulnerabilities sometimes apply even when we're talking about students in the school. So what can we do as an organization to lower that threat to our staff or our students? The answer is to provide privacy and IT security training to all of our employees and students. And that means all of us, from superintendents and principals all the way down to the students in our classrooms. Incidentally, also our IT administration staff. A lot of times they kind of avoid that, but no, really everyone who uses an information system, uses a computer in your environment, should be trained and should receive sort of ongoing training on threat awareness and security training. So the best way to do that, depending on your organization, may look a lot different. We recommend at least annually as a good place to start. Now, that whether that's a single monolithic annual training day where everybody just sort of focuses on training for the day, there's benefits and drawbacks to that. I tend to find that spreading out training throughout the year is probably going to net you better overall awareness, but at very least once a year, either online or in person, some combination of the above, that focuses on identifying the threats that users face and providing strategies and best practices for those on the front lines to use to reduce the likelihood of them being a victim to one of these cyber attacks. So the training should focus around things like cyber hygiene and safe browsing, providing information for the users to protect their data and themselves while they're actively using the systems. It should also talk about data protection strategies and provide users with information to help them work more securely or protect their data or comply with organizational acceptable use policies, for example. So providing them with some tools to keep them safe online and protect themselves and your systems from attack. Now, the training's should always include detailed explanations of sort of the social engineering attack strategies that are going on, and provide you know, methods for recognizing and reporting these attacks, and how to avoid activities which benefit the attacker. So really empowering the users not only with ways, channels that they can report this, but also to provide them with tools to recognize when they're in a situation that might be a cyber attack, and to avoid doing those things, such as, when you're talking to someone from the organization, they'll never ask you for your actual password, sort of a thing. So providing your users with that sort of data, helps them to be harder targets. So equally as important to including how to report the threats or suspected cyber attacks is that feedback mechanism, right? Not only should you have those feedbacks, but they should also be sort of destigmatized, and users should not have any worries or reticence to call those numbers, to reach out to those contacts, to report when something has gone amiss, or when they suspect that either there's a technology or a social engineering attack in progress. So annual training is also a great time to revisit sort of your organizational policies around, say, acceptable use policies around computer and internet resources, or school data systems, or privacy data. And to reestablish those employee expectations for security, sort of recruit them into this culture of security and get them thinking about it. It's a great time as well to talk to your students about the importance of digital privacy and cybersecurity and being good digital citizens. The training, of course, benefits everybody, not only protecting the school and the school's data systems, but also building good cybersecurity habits, not only for our staff, but also for the kids, to protect them as they enter into that digital world. So in short, privacy and security training is something that we recommend to every organization on an annual basis, at least, to ensure that their workforce and students are aware of social engineering threats and other technical threats, and are empowered with those tools and strategies to reduce that risk, and by proxy protect the organization's digital infrastructure and data. So another key factor in preparing for a cyber incident is to perform annual risk assessments. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, identifies risk assessment as the process of identifying the risk to a system, security, and determining the probability of occurrence, the resulting impact, and the additional safeguards that mitigate this impact. Now, how that could be a kind of a fancy way of saying it's a formal organizational process for looking at cyber risks that your organization faces, weighing those risks against the protections and preparations that you've put in place, and determining the impact if that event were to occur. So now risk assessments are formal organizational processes, and formal meaning that they should be developed into some kind of a policy which outlines that process for conducting the risk assessment, and includes the steps involved in the assessment process, the periodicity of those assessments. We recommend at least annually. The expected outcomes, what are you going to get out of that assessment, and the process for incorporating the results of the risk assessment lessons learned back into your existing organizational policies and procedures, right? The purpose of this assessment process is to understand risks and to make changes that reduce the risk to an acceptable level. So now NIST lays out a process of risk assessment into 4 rough stages, and these work generally well. The first stage is the identification stage, which is a process by which the organization finds, documents, and categorizes all of the risks that you can think of that your organization's data and systems are going to face. It's important, in this process to be as thorough as you can, right? To be meticulous so that you have a thorough accounting of all the risks that are likely to befall your organization, and be as exhaustive as possible. The more complete you can be at this stage, the better results you'll get at the end. The second step is analysis. In this phase, of course, you're ascertaining the nature of the risks and figuring out what the impact and effect those risks would have should they happen. Right. So, for example, if one of your risks that your organization faces is phishing attacks, then you would want to break those attacks down into the various types of phishing that may happen and kind of play out those various scenarios to determine what would be the possible outcomes if those various types of phishing attacks were successful, and what would the impact be. This can be a tedious and somewhat unproductive feeling process. You can feel easily overwhelmed during it. But however, I would say stick with it because, as I mentioned, what this is about is really sort of heading off those future attacks before they happen. You're really exposing weaknesses by identifying those risks and assessing what their impacts would be, so that you can sort of deploy your resources in a way that makes sense. The third step in this process is evaluation, where we apply organizational risk tolerances to our existing security controls and the mitigations to whatever the risk is. So, if we're looking at some sort of technical risk, we take a look at what our risk tolerance is, how often that risk might occur, and what the impacts are, and we determine, is that a risk that we really need to further mitigate, or is that risk sufficiently small, given our current security posture, that we're not going to worry about putting additional mitigations in place there. So in layman's terms, this is your organization finding out how much risk is too much, right? And it's a great place. So as you go through this process, to kind of reconsider where your organizational risk tolerances are, right? So as an industry 10 years ago, we were very much a different place. We were wide open. We were sitting ducks, sometimes easy targets for hackers. And as these lessons have been accumulating over the years, we've become harder targets. We're much more capable. Our systems are more defensible and more resilient. So as a result, our adversaries have increased the sophistication of their attacks. And so these risk assessments are a great opportunity to kind of reassess where you are in that equation. And if you need to make changes, change them. Of course, the final phase of the risk assessment is the control phase of the process. And this is where you've identified whether those risks are too great and you need to apply some mitigations. Here is where you would determine what mitigations you need to apply and build the plans to put those mitigations in place to reduce the risks, right? And so through this process, although it may seem cumbersome and onerous, it's actually a very critical foundational step to understanding your organization's security and privacy posture. And it's really a worthwhile effort to reduce the risk of cyber incident and data breach at schools. So we recommend that organizations do these sorts of risk assessments on an annual basis, but each organization should investigate and determine, what is the appropriate timeline for you to be conducting these periodic risk assessments, what works best. So in the next few, or in the previous slides, we've discussed strategies and ways to protect or prepare for cyber incidents and data breaches. Now let's flip the script and look at best practices for building the incident response capabilities. All of us would like to believe that our organizations would never be the victims of a cyber attack or a data breach, but the data tells us that it's really not a matter of if, right? It's a matter of when. So we need to be prepared to respond when the event occurs, despite all of our preparations. So let's look at some ways that we can do that. So over the next few slides, I'm going to cover some incident response best practices that you can use within your organizations to kind of supercharge your ability to react to and respond to cyber incidents. I'm not going to lie to you, incident response is never a pleasant experience. It's usually a pretty bad day when you break out of your, normal activities to do it, to dust off the incident response plan. But if you implement some of these best practices, you can make a bad day slightly less bad, or maybe even shorten the number of bad days by being able to recognize, respond, and resolve the incident more quickly and with less bleeding. The first major point that I'd like to talk about when we're speaking about incident response is the tendency of organizations to believe that because a cyber incident involves computers, that it's somehow a process that's owned by IT. While it is true that due to the nature of how we store data as schools and process data, almost any incident is going to involve IT. Incident response is not owned by IT. So if your incident response program is owned by IT, it is not operating as effectively and efficiently as it could be. And we're going to talk about why here just in a few minutes. Your incident response team should absolutely include somebody from your legal department, as well as representations from your communications or public affairs office. Of course, the team should also include leadership and IT or maybe other stakeholders that make sense for your organization. But many organizations fail to realize the benefits and, in fact, the necessity of having legal counsel and communication as part of that team. Because we need to ensure legal compliance and sufficiency with our response. And we also, communications, especially when we're talking about data breaches that may impact students or parents or employees, clear and consistent messaging, right, is truly important. So having those some of those folks tied in with your incident response can make all the difference. So another hot tip is to not to forget to validate what you are responding to. I've seen a lot of really great incident response plans, and I've seen a lot of folks jump right into those plans and start taking action as if there was, as if that breach notification that they received or the incident that they are responding to was real. And in fact, maybe it was misreported or it wasn't reported correctly. So validation is always that very first step in the process. And so I highly recommend that you always validate what you're hearing first, investigate to make sure that there is, in fact, an incident underway or sufficient indications that something is happening before you ring the bells and launch the fire trucks. So now that I've been doing incident response for a few years, I've seen organizations start out with beautiful incident response plans and processes that they've spent a lot of time and effort, perfecting, and almost invariably they end up in these 3-ring binders that are put in a bookshelf someplace, and they're forgotten about until there's a breach. The problem is that when the event occurs and you need to break that glass in case of emergency, those carefully crafted plans and processes no longer resemble the systems and networks and technology and data that the plans were originally written for. Right? A mediocre incident response plan that is periodically reviewed and tested and updated is very much better than an excellent incident response plan from 10 years ago. As you generate incident response plans and policies, remember that you need to continuously review these policies and test these plans and evolve them as your systems and data change over time. And finally, it's easy to be hyper-focused on the here and now when we're talking about incident response, but arguably the most important phase of any incident response comes after all of the response activities have concluded. And that's where you collect all of those metrics and lessons learned from your response activities from what just occurred. And you use those lessons to improve your incident response process and policy and drive that positive change, right? To shorten the response time or make the response process easier, or even better, to reduce the risk of an incident like that occurring again in the future. Of course, there are a million other things that we could go on about for each of these tips. We could delve into volumes of other best practices, but here's a good core selection of ways to drastically improve your response planning and processes. Over the next few slides, we'll examine some of these key factors in more detail. So the first best practice I want to talk about is kind of foundational in nature, and that is building your incident response team. Your incident response team is the core of an organization's incident response process, and it's a team of individuals that have identified as being responsible for responding and mitigating cyber incidents or data breaches. Now, it's important to realize that incident response teams have a much wider role than strictly focusing on cyber incidents. In fact, the incident response team may be invoked whenever there's an emergency or an incident facing an organization. Whether it's a natural disaster, like a storm, or a fire, or a flood, or malware, ransomware, cyber attacks, denial of service. Anything that may involve access to data or an impact to systems. As we hinted in the previous slide, the incident response team is not solely comprised of individuals from IT. Teams are often comprised of a cadre of sort of core members representing stakeholders like organizational leadership, legal counsel, communications, and of course, IT, but may also include additional members depending on the type or scope of the incidents that are brought in as necessary. For example, commonly these additional members represent other stakeholders in the organization, like data owners or external parties, like third-party vendors or school officials. It may include other organizational functions like school safety or facilities. The key concept to remember here is that every organization needs to have a plan for how to respond in the case of an incident, and to identify that incident response team who will be responsible for putting that plan into action and managing response efforts to conclusion. In the previous slide, we talked about some of the core membership common to the incident response team, and that starts with leadership. A cyber incident or data breach impacts every part of an organization, and as such, organizational leadership needs to be informed and involved in the response process to make critical decisions to ensure sufficient, compliant, and timely response actions, and to, of course, protect the interests of the organization. As we mentioned, it all starts with a formalized policy and plan. The policy and plan should lay out organizational expectations, identify key roles and responsibilities, and establish the periodic review and update schedule. The organizational incident response plan should be publicized and socialized throughout the organization so that stakeholders understand their role in incident response and have an opportunity to weigh in and provide inputs to ensure the plan is effective and that it's reflective of the organization's needs. Along those same lines, the plan should be supported through reporting and feedback mechanisms so that as the enterprise grows and changes, the plan can evolve between the established review periods. Excuse me. Again, the policy needs to assign roles and responsibilities. To the extent possible, identify individuals, but at the very least, functional roles. Remember that the organizational incident response plan should be endorsed and promulgated by the organization's leadership. This is the only way to ensure that the entire organization accepts and understands their roles in this process. Like we talked about previously, if this function resides somewhere else, such as there's a tendency for other stakeholders to ignore or push back on the process. So if you're putting it into IT's hands and making them the owners of that process, it's much more likely that other parts of the organization will push back on that. So when it comes from leadership, however, it's more universally accepted. So we understand that we need to have an incident response plan and a policy in place, and the plan needs to come from the top down and be championed by leadership. So let's take a couple of slides to talk about those key stakeholders that need to be included in that core of your incident response process. And we'll start with the legal eagles, your lawyers or legal counsel. Having legal counsel be a central part of your incident response team is a massive benefit to the organization. As we all know, cyber incidents and data breaches have potential legal ramification for a school or district, and having that legal counsel plugged into the incident response team ensures that your process is legally sufficient and in compliance with the various laws and regulations that apply. So depending on the incident or breach, the type of data elements or other factors, there may be a whole bunch of laws at the state or federal level which may require certain reporting actions or notification actions be taken within a certain period of time. So in this kind of confusion and stress, when an incident response effort is in its nascent stages, right, the incident has just occurred, it's very easy for an organization to kind of lose track of those legal responsibilities and find itself in a lot of trouble. So while the organization may be focused on mitigating threat, there is definitely a need to protect organizational interests during the incident response process. Because of those kind of confusing legal requirements and the wide variety of laws that may be in play, you need someone in your incident response team that is ensuring the organization is protecting its interests and remaining in compliance with those requirements. So in many cases, lastly, cyber incidents may be criminal in nature and require that the organization interface with law enforcement or other state entities. So it's really critical when dealing with these types of agencies that the interactions are managed properly so as not to impact criminal investigations or the admissibility of evidence or inject confusion into the process. It's always best for any interactions with these types of outside agencies, such as law enforcement, to be handled by or coordinated with your legal counsel. Now, this person could be your local legal counsel. It could be an outside counsel. It may even be counsel provided by an entity such as your cyber insurance company. But the point here is that you should have some competent legal counsel as part of your incident response team to look out for your interests and ensure compliance with the legal requirements. So now that we've talked about the legal side of things, let's talk about one of the most misunderstood aspects of incident response. Uh, and that is that the technical aspects of responding to a cyber incident or a data breach are often the easy part, right? The technology systems and computers are kind of a solved science, and the process of responding to an incident, while it's stressful and imposing and difficult, is largely predictable and well known. The hard part is most often the communication aspects of incident response. Whether that's communicating with the victims of a data breach or with the press about an incident or to internal stakeholders and employees or even students which may have been affected by the incident. So whether your incident response activities are a success or not is largely predicated on your ability to effectively communicate with stakeholders and the public and to provide that timely, clear, consistent messaging. To that end, every organization should seek to include its communications or public affairs office in your incident response team. Any incident or event that is of sufficient size or complexity, such as a denial of service attack or a ransomware attack, or other cyber incident that impacts a school system's availability or interrupts classes, there'll be a need to provide information to explain the outage to parents, to students, perhaps even to state agencies. And the question, and we've all heard kind of this expression that you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. And that exception holds true in the case of cyber incidents as well. Your first communication set the tone for the rest of your incident response process. And I've seen many organizations over the years whose communications are unclear or they come too late or they're not consistent. And as a result, the school district's relationship, either with the public or with state agencies, is damaged as a result of that kind of confusion and misunderstanding, which could have been corrected by clear communication. So incident response communications need to be concise, clear, and consistent. They need to inform without speculation and to engender a sense that the organization has the situation in hand. And this holds true both in external communications and also internally with employees and students. By bringing in communications professionals as part of your incident response team, this frees up your technical folks and leadership resources to focus on the incident response itself and ensures that the communications come from a single source that is versed in providing professional communications. And this kind of approach ensures that your message aligns well with your response activities, that it addresses the concerns of the audience, and that it sends the message that the organization is in control of the situation and is providing the best information that it has. So it's always best practice to have communications professionals involved right from the start. It's far easier to communicate earlier and better than to have to amend statements or fill in details after the fact. So do yourselves a favor, bring in your communications or your public affairs folks to your incident response team at the earliest possible moments, and you won't regret it. So we mentioned earlier that threats evolve over time, as do our information systems and processes. So it's very important for us to review and update our incident response plans over time. So let's talk about some ways that the organization can continually manage and improve your incident response plan and process. Now, we talked about the need to do periodic risk assessments to evaluate the current state of risks facing your organization and to enumerate how your systems and network have evolved, and to determine the likelihood of occurrence and impact that those threats may have on your systems and data. So this is a very important function, and ensuring that your incident response plans are always reflective of the environment is a key outcome of that. But just doing an annual risk assessment and making some changes as a result of that is not alone sufficient to ensure that your incident response process will work well in an actual cyber incident or data breach. For that, you need to test your incident response plan against some of those threats in a simulated incident response exercise. We recommend that every organization should conduct at least annually an incident response plan exercise, like a war game, so to speak, where you use a scenario which reflects current threats, where the organization's incident response team will sit down and simulate a response to this scenario, evaluating the various response activities, communications, the technical mitigations, and the compliance steps that would be needed in that scenario, and to identify weaknesses in the incident response plans or enhancements that you can make to make that plan better. This can be as simple as a tabletop exercise where you get all the parties together in a conference room and you talk through the response to a given scenario, or as complex as a full organization cyber exercise where you have users and stakeholders and maybe third parties participating in the scenario. So no matter what approach you take, the purpose of this annual incident response exercise is to test your incident response team and your incident response process to find the hiccups and challenges that might occur before it counts, before you're doing it in an actual incident. Because the last thing that you want as an organization is for the first time you find out there's a problem with your incident plan is to be in the midst of an actual cyber incident or a data breach when you can least afford to have a problem. So many organizations, link these important functions like risk assessment, incident response exercises, end user awareness training together in order to amplify the message and generate awareness. As you know, October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. This is a great opportunity to do some of these important incident response and threat awareness activities in the context of this national focus on cybersecurity awareness. So if you're going to do it, now's a great time to start in support of these Cybersecurity Awareness Month activities. So incident response is hard. It's a draining, stressful, terrifying experience that every organization dreads. And in the event of an incident, every organization just wants to get through the process so that they can get back to normal again. While I completely understand the desire to quickly put this event behind you, there is one more and arguably the most important step in the incident response process that you must do. The most overlooked step in incident response comes after all of the frantic activity associated with responding to and mitigating the cyber event. And that's when an organization reviews the events of the response and identifies information that can be used to strengthen defenses or improve your incident response in the future. So during the response process, the incident response team should be diligently documenting their response efforts and capturing this important data about how the incident response proceeded, what worked well, what didn't work at all, things that were missed or should have been added to the incident response process or plan, all the things that could have been done better, and the benchmarks as well. In this process, you want to record all of those things. And then in the post-response setting, the organization should be internalizing these observations, sort of extrapolating from them ways that they can improve security and to better their ability to respond to incidents occurring in the future. Remember, the goal of incident response is not just to check some boxes and put an event behind you, but for you and your organization to become stronger as a result, to reduce the likelihood of a similar event occurring in the future. So I know that we have covered a lot of information about enhancing your incident response capabilities and processes, but I want to close our session today by talking about another important aspect of incident response, and that is reporting. When you have an incident or data breach, one of the first questions you want to ask yourself is, what are the reporting requirements? The answer to that question largely depends on your state laws. Again, the type of data that's involved as well. But beyond the legal reporting requirements that may or may not exist, depending on your state and the type of data, we strongly recommend that you consider calling us here at the Privacy Technical Assistance Center at the U.S. Department of Education for a couple of reasons. First, we're not the FERPA police, we're here to help, remember. So we are a technical assistance center. Our goal is to connect you with guidance and resources and information to help protect student information and education data systems. So we can help in your response efforts by providing that technical assistance and access to best practices. We have collectively many decades of experience in incident response. Our website contains a vast array of resources that can help you address questions you have about protecting privacy and data security. We also have a ton of training materials that are out there that can help you establish those strong privacy and security awareness training programs, strengthen your user base. Tons of things that are available. So we don't shy away from giving us a call. We have a lot to offer, and even if it's just for moral support or to commiserate with people who understand exactly what you're going through, I promise calling PTAC, we can help. So with that, I'd like to highlight a couple of our incredible data breach resources, which are available to all of you on our website, starting with one of our most popular downloads, our data breach response checklist. This resource provides a great framework or a starting point for building your own incident response process or plan. And while it is not in of itself a template for you to simply cut and paste, it does have a ton of great information about the various phases of the incident response process, highlighting key decision points and response essentials that many organizations have found very helpful when building their plans. The link here on this slide will definitely take you there. Feel free to reach out to us if you have questions about anything that's inside of it. Of course, we love talking to you about our resources, and we can additionally provide you with a ton of additional information as well. Another great resource I'd like you to direct your attention to is our downloadable data breach training kits. Earlier in the session, we talked about the importance of doing those periodic incident response exercises and how conducting those tabletop exercises on a periodic basis can help test and improve your incident response and familiarize your incident response team with what it feels like to be engaged in an actual response. Well, sometimes coming up with the scenario is the hardest part, right? So we have taken a lot of the work out of it for you by coming up with a series of these downloadable training kits, which contain a cybersecurity incident or data breach scenario, along with some supporting documentation and things like facilitator guides that your organization can download, customize, and use for your own incident response tabletop exercises. In fact, we just developed a new expansion pack of 3 more of these scenarios, which are available for download on our website at the link on the screen. So certainly check these out, try them out, and let us know what you think. Hopefully they allow you and your organization to conduct a very useful test of your incident response plans. So here's a spot where I would generally open the floor for questions if we were having this in a live context. But for those of you who are watching this recording, please feel free to reach out to us at PTAC with any questions that you have about incident response or any aspect of the student privacy or data security that you have questions. You can reach us through our website at studentprivacy.ed.gov or certainly through telephone or by email at privacyta@ed.gov. Again, we always love talking to our folks in the field, and we will endeavor to provide you with access to all the resources and information that we can. So with that, I will say thank you so much for joining us today as we talked about cyber threat and ways to strengthen your incident response planning process. Again, my name is Mike Tassi, and it has been my genuine pleasure to talk to you today. I wish you all the best as you develop strong incident response programs of your own.